Hello everyone, James Donaldson here with The Contemporary Gentleman, and great ways to support us are by buying into our Spies series. This one's first, this one's second, links below, and of course following us on Instagram. Alright everyone, so in this video we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness and what to consider. We're kind of calling this a realistic prepper's kit because there are things you should have on hand. Now, full disclosure is that all the items we have I bought with my real name, so none of the companies probably don't even know who I am to begin with, but if they did see this video they wouldn't be able to look through their sales records and figure out who I am. So, that said, moving on from there, we are going to also do kind of a breakdown of what I have in my bag. Now, I'm sure I'll mention it later, but this is subject to change. I might remove some things in using it. I might add some things. I might change some things in general. So, stay tuned. Alright, so someone may wonder, why even prepare? What are you preparing for? What are you worried about? What are you so scared of? What are you afraid of? It's not what it's about. If you fall down the stairs and skin your knee, you should probably clean it. Well, you got running water, things like that. Maybe you need a Band-Aid. That's preparedness right there. Now, emergency preparedness is something more serious. Okay, you have a fire. Well, you probably have a fire extinguisher. So, these people belittling your will to put in some effort to prepare for something is really silly. So, not to mention, if we do want to go on the intense side, the summer of COVID, summer of 2020, and the riots, that actually proved a lot of people were kind of right about the whole prepping thing. Now, did they miss the mark some? I would say some people did and some people didn't. Just know that there are no guarantees in your prepping, and that's where the realistic part comes in. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you may actually prepare for and have in your go bag or whatever you want to call it, and just things to consider. So, I do want to add that with all the information I'm going to put out, do consider how it applies to you, right? So like if you're in Florida and you wouldn't go north very far, so you probably don't need to worry about cold weather problems. Or, you know, if you're up north and your goal is to just stay up north or go further north, then there's definitely going to be some southerly things that you're not going to have to worry about. Something else, final thing I want to preface the rest of this with is, do not drive yourself crazy in anticipation of what may or may not happen, right? So again, that's where we go back to the realistic part. What might happen, what's happening elsewhere that you may expect, and also how much effort does it take, how much money, how much training and skills, because those are important, is it going to take to be prepared for those things, right? So like, getting together with a bunch of friends and being able to do a SEALs Team 6 raid, that's awesome. But if you can't apply a tourniquet, you may want to adjust your skill set a little bit, or maybe where you're focusing your efforts, at least for 1 month a year. So first off, you need a plan, right? You need to think out what you may need to plan for. So is it going to be a natural disaster or a not so natural disaster? Is it a toxic train spill? Very timely. Or is there a civil war or a hurricane, a natural disaster, right? So natural disasters are probably some of the more common things you can expect, whether it's fires or hurricanes or tornadoes or monsoon downpours of water, rain rather, or whatever. So those are kind of the more realistic things you can expect. Rioting. Civil war, invasion, not so much, but depending on how much effort, time, skill, money you have to put into preparing for like a civil war or an invasion from another country, you may give those a little bit of thought. You know, having no plan isn't really good. Maybe even it's worth it to you just to think on your own, or maybe discuss with your wife what you would do if that kind of thing happened, right? Costs you some time, that's it. Something I like to tell people and explain to them when I'm talking about preparedness is, just thinking about it now versus when you need to think about it puts you ahead. And then thinking about it more puts you further ahead. Planning something puts you further ahead. Getting things together to execute that plan puts you further ahead. So everything is better than doing nothing. So I'll just put that out there. Now, one of the biggest questions you have to ask yourself when you're compiling your kit is the kinks. Should I stay or should I go? For me, and talking things over with my wife, it's going to depend on what's happening. So if there is, this is just an example, alright? Don't, James, you're talking about realistic stuff. Okay, so nuclear fallout. I know, not as realistic. Totally agree. Using it as an example, you should probably stay at your house, at least initially. And that's a whole other subject I'm really not even going to touch in this video, except for a little bit. But, conversely, a tornado, you'd probably stay in your house initially, and then you would go searching for help. And then something like a hurricane, you'd probably be leaving your home, trying to get out of the state, city, whatever. So, are you going or you're staying? And so how do you need to pack? Is just having some of the things I'm going to talk about in a bag just around the house going to work? Or is it going to make more sense to have it in a bag you can put on your back and hike a long distance? Things to consider. So, the other thing to think about is if you do leave, how far do you have to go? Where are you going? There's a big difference between searching for help and trying to escape. So, some examples would be, if you have to search for help, how far do you have to search? Is it simply going to the next town? Is it getting out of the state? Is it just another neighborhood? What kind of distance do you need to be prepared for to travel? Okay, so we'll go to, again, less realistic, but we're trying to cover all our bases here. Civil War kind of thing, or invasion. Okay, so maybe your plan is to fight. So what's your plan to go meet up with other people? How far are you going? If your plan is to leave the country, give up, how far are you going? You really have two options, and depending on where you live, they might be very far away, or one's closer and one's not. For me, I have a long ways to go in either direction, and I really haven't made up my mind about which way I would go. But since that's less realistic, it's just been in my thoughts. I haven't motioned anything else to happen to prepare for that. I've been focusing on the realistic stuff, which we're going to get to. So as far as where you're going, how are you getting there? So my plan is to try to avoid using vehicles. Now it's easy to say that, but depending on where I'm going and how far I have to go, especially for the fact that, which we'll talk about, I'm planning for taking a wife and children, both children of which are under the age of 6, not using a car could be complicated, or at the least very difficult. It could be one of those things we do for a mile and then give in and acquire a car, I don't know. The point is that cars attract a lot of attention, especially if you're one of the few people with one. Also, a car isn't an item that you can just not use and put in your pocket and continue on without it. Oh shit, we need it, then pull it out, right? So you'll have to return to the car, just stay with the car. Also, for one of our plans, we would have to cross a river. So we have to go over a bridge. It's quite possible that highways in those areas, choke points will be blocked or dangerous to even go to, even if they're not blocked. These are all things to consider. So, the how, big deal. And then also, what are obstacles where you're going? One of the things I recommend, as this is how I learned to traverse terrain, is path of most resistance. And that's looking for IEDs on foot. Basically, you want to go path of most you choose whatever path you choose, and then when there is an obstacle that you think may be dangerous, one of the SOPs is to check it out, but you want to move around. You want to go path of most resistance, because you really, realistically, cannot easily find most explosives, especially in a place where they've been training generation after generation to hide them. So, path of most resistance does a few things for you. One, it's probably going to be, you're probably going to be heavily occluded, hard to see, other than maybe some movement in bushes and stuff. 2 is there's less likely to be booby traps where you're going. So you're avoiding a handful of different variety of danger in that instance. So, path of most resistance. My plan to cross the river has nothing to do with any man-made bridge, and I would also probably avoid places where there's pretty habitually low water, because other people are going to pass there. We'll talk about why I want to avoid other people at all costs in my plan in a bit. So, let's start talking about some items. What are you going to pack? If you don't know the answers to anything I was just talking about, it's okay, because you're going to have to start somewhere. So I would start with medical. Get a bag any bag that you got laying around, start filling it with medical supplies. Do a little research. Don't just go out and buy a first aid kit. Do a little research on the first aid kit and what's in it. Usually if I go out and buy like a CVS first aid kit, I don't use the kit. I actually disperse the items in it to different bags. Kits I do recommend are from Adventure Medical Supplies, and I'll put a link below. They're awesome. They have such a variety. It actually takes a long time to sort through and figure out which one you want for your situation. I ended up going with the full-scale Mountaineer one. I'll also put the link there, just because I wanted everything. And then there were still some additional items I added, like tourniquets, as far as medical. So in that category I went pretty hard, but I'll probably buy another kit or two from them, much smaller scale, versus some other places like vehicles and things to replace some not so good first aid kits we have lying around. So what else should you pack other than medical? Because medical falls in this, what I'm about to talk about, and that's you want to put yourself in the situation of you're watching the mainstream media and they're talking about how everything's going crazy. Remember, think about being without toilet paper for weeks at a time, right? So what are you going to want then that you could go buy now and not have to go looking for it? So think about that. Medical is a big one. Probably some bottled water, although we'll talk about it. I would go too crazy with bottled water. But bottled water, things like that. Think about the things you might want in an emergency that you don't have right now and that you could probably stock up on. Maybe buy a couple things a month, not anything crazy, but then build up a little bit of a supply, especially medically, etc. I really can't hit on medical enough. Now, additionally, you don't want to go get that stuff, not just because they might be sold out, but people are crazy. Humans are crazy, and when there's panic, people will do anything if they feel justified in saving themselves or their family. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's incredibly bad. So avoiding public places where people are going crazy is going to be a big, big thing. Also, those people might be pushing out of the way to get stuff, but think about the people that are going to see people and what they have and want it. And some of them are going to try to get it. So again, you want to avoid all confrontation as possible because your mission is survival. And that's what you're kitting yourself up for, to survive. And that's what you're planning for, to survive. And there are going to be people out there that are trying to prevent you from succeeding in that mission. So avoiding people at all costs, especially big groups of them, is going to be key in all of this. So next thing I want you to think about is making some notes. Maybe get a notebook, keep it in this bag where you're going to collect your things, and make some notes about things you want to remember. Distances, directions, how to get somewhere. Also, for instance, so my bag has most everything in there, but there's a few things that didn't make sense. Like, I'm not going to buy 2 axes and put one on a backpack and have it sit in my mechanical room for an event that may never happen. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I've got a short list of a couple things that aren't constantly in the bag, and that way I remember to get them. So like the axe or a lockpick kit, that kind of thing. So make notes on your thoughts, because during a time of emergency, not only do you want to avoid forgetting those things, and some of them you'll probably forget, but also think about time on target. Time on target is an important thing in the military that I learned about extensively and now have been teaching, and that's where you're trying to minimize the time that you're at a location where you need to move off the location, or a location of potential danger. So if you're at your house and you need to leave your house as fast as possible with your family and your things, those things better be ready to reduce your time on target. Target being your house at that point. Now, if you're not going anywhere, a little different story. But again, keep that in mind. So something else I want to hit on is, who are you packing for? Do you have friends you're going to go with? So you need to pack some things because you're a part of a little group of people and you got your pieces you bring to the table. That's awesome. Or are you packing for your wife and kids, or just your wife, or just yourself? There are definitely things in my bag, some of them weigh a little more than others, that are only in there because I'm thinking of my kids and our wife. So like 4 toothbrushes, obviously, but something like a mosquito net. It's a bit bulky. It's not super heavy, but consider that ounces equal pounds, so weight is a big deal and ounces are a big deal. But I would not have the mosquito net in there if this pack was just for me. Also, I've got a little bit of redundancy. I've got a big tarp. I probably would not have that either. And that's another thing that adds more weight than you would think. So again, who are you packing for? What do you need to think about? The mosquito thing's important because bug spray only works so much, and being able to just have them passively be protected while resting or doing whatever they're doing is kind of a big deal. So consider that. All right, so when it comes to bag, you really shouldn't buy one. This should be one of the last things you buy, if not the last. And that's because when it comes to packs, bags, plate carriers, chest rigs, chest rig is actually a good ad for this kind of situation and planning. But there's no point buying them until you know what's going to go in them and how much it is and weight and things like that. So do what I did. I had a bag laying around, kind of like I mentioned earlier, but I started putting things in. And it got to a certain point where it was pretty tight, and then that's when I did know what else I was going to buy, like I already knew. So going ahead, buying the bag, getting everything moved over, and then organizing once I got the few other things, that's how it worked out. Now again, use your best judgment as far as if you're going to wait till you're done acquiring everything, or if you think you can get most of the way. We'll talk about which bag I chose in a moment. Something to consider is you got one mission. Don't die. Don't let your family die. It's kind of one mission together. So just focus on things that are going to help you do that. This is the kind of thing where you're not going to probably take curling irons and things like that. You're not going to take your PS2. Okay? There's just things, luxury items you're not going to take. And if anything, you need to go with less luxury items as possible to allow for your wife or especially your children to have some. Because you need to think about the psychology of trauma. And if they can have some extra items to help, then that could go a long way. More food for thought. So a couple other things. Appearance / pack cover. I like them hand in hand because, so appearance, I don't want to scream military. So as you'll see, my bag is pretty basic, or I probably already rolled in photos of it. But the bag is pretty basic. It's just a green Mystery Ranch. The pack cover is one of the last things I have to get. I'm going to get a camo one so that way I can obscure it better. But of course, pack cover is also going to protect it from the elements. So you got those two things going. So again, not trying to draw attention with the bag, but you definitely want it to be utilitarian, of course. So when it comes to medical, do consider some basic things such as MARCH, massive hemorrhage, airway, respiratory, circulation, and hypothermia or head injury. But on the flip side, also remember that there's such thing as boo-boos, as infections can still happen to you. Of course, water purification, which you'll see some examples right here, such as I've got some tablets, as well as a few other odds and ends, such as one that connects to a tap, so if you have still water pressure, you can purify that water, but also there's one that you simply fill up a bag of water and then attach the filter and push the water through. So again, water purification is pretty big for keeping people healthy, and that way, your family's not going to get sick. So there are other methods, such as boiling water, and depending on your scenario, that might be an okay method. Something I touched on a little bit earlier was, are you trying to be found or not? In most cases, you're probably trying to be found. You're looking for help. But if you're in a scenario where you don't want to be found, making a fire and boiling water is not the best method to use to purify water. Whereas tablets are a good way because you can take your item, you can fill it up with water, throw a tablet in, it's an Nalgene or whatever it is, and move on with your day. The other methods of filtration that I mentioned a moment ago are also pretty easy. So pretty wise things to keep in mind. Again, getting to the bottled water, it's good things to have on hand, but don't overdo it, because again, if you have to leave your situation, you can only take so many bottles of water with you. They're going to be heavy, they're going to be bulky, and it's going to be stuff that can be stolen from you. Whereas something like a Sawyer Squeeze, link below, Sawyer Squeeze is pretty tiny, you can easily hide it in some kind of pouch or compartment. So again, food for thought. Moving on, painkillers, antibodies, etc. And you got medical sustainment, so Q-tips, baby wipes, foot powder, Hygiene, important, soap, things like that. 3 shots. This is an interesting thing that I learned from watching Pat McNamara, is he's got 3 vodka Smirnoff shots in his little superhero bag, or coming to get you bag, as he says. A great video. I'll probably link it below. but he talks about having 3 shots in there. One, he can start a fire with it, though it is difficult, but also he can sterilize with it, and also if he has to set someone's leg or do something like that, 2 shots for them, 1 for him. That's just awesome. Anyway, if you don't know, Pat McNamara, pretty experienced guy when it comes to all this kind of stuff. And then the final thing, Zip-Loc bags. I have tons of Zip-Loc bags. There's so much you can do with Zip-Loc bags. They waterproof things, they protect things, just the list goes on. They weigh nothing even for a metric ton of them in your bag. So I've got a lot of Zip-Loc bags, both gallon size and quart. Next is navigation. Having methods to navigate. I would have them pre-configured as well as far as your plan of where you're going to go once you work up that plan. So my wife and I have a place we're going to go to, depending on the scenario, more natural or disaster related kind of scenario, but we have a place with friends where we will go. There, you can get there by car, and depending on, we have to cross the river I mentioned. So navigation, I actually have a map, which I'll pop up here, and it is in the right scale, military grid rating system, and of course I have a protractor and compass to use with it. And so if I had to, I could navigate using those methods. I guess I could, but it'd probably be pretty difficult to practice going there, path of most resistance, just in terms of time I have to do that. Not to mention the danger of crossing a river just for the hell of it. Not quite for the hell of it, but you see what I'm saying. But also, yeah, I'm probably going through a lot of private property in that. And so, natural disaster, not as big of a deal. Any old day, kind of a big thing. I don't really want altercations. So that will help. The map will help me find my way. Also GPS, although GPS could lead you to being tracked. But again, maybe, as in most cases, you're not concerned about that, so it's going to be a helpful tool. Maps and markers, etc. Good things to have, just a state map or map of your area, even if you don't print out one like I did, which link below to where I got that done. I'm pretty much going to have links for everything down here. So, and then tracing material. So, hunter's tacks. Another Pat McNamara idea I saw where basically you stick them into trees so that hunters don't get lost in the woods. And not only are they luminescent in the day because they're bright, orange or white, depending on which one you buy, but also they have reflectors, so if you have a flashlight, you can hit them and find your way back out. So, yet another awesome thing to have, and I put that in the navigation category. Next is fire and signal. So I'm going to kind of run through this quick. Starting a fire, I've got a lighter, ferrocerium rod, fire starter, Vaseline and cotton balls. Well, I don't have those, but those are things you can easily make, and at some point I'll add them in there. Just with all these other redundancies, I wasn't in a hurry to accomplish that. I do have a road flare and matches. So all these things can help start a fire depending on the conditions. It's what I'll use. If I have plenty of time and there's no rush, I'm probably going to use the most difficult method, or I should say the least easy method. Now this is where skills come in, and it doesn't just apply to fires, but you do want to have some skill and experience using these tools. You don't want to figure out a ferrocerium rod when you need to immediately. Granted, the road flares for immediate stuff, or things like that, or matches and Vaseline balls, but I think you see where I'm going with this. So, get some experience, check this stuff out. Vaseline covered cotton balls can actually burn a good amount of time, and they're very inexpensive to make, which a lot of this stuff is pretty surprisingly inexpensive. And then on top of that, they can burn up to 7 minutes, in my experience. That's not really average, though. It's usually, 3 minutes or so. But, again, starting fires. Now, getting to the signal portion, so whistle, right? Audible signaling. You've also got signal mirror, chem lights, or glow sticks as some people call them, and then there's road flare, also applies to that. A fire, so basically everything I mentioned a moment ago, also applies to signaling, and then orange poncho, and then possibly electronics and communications. That's one of the categories I haven't filled yet, as I'm figuring out kind of exactly the approach I want to take, especially as it involves batteries and things. So, phone, of course, is another good one. Again, depending on your scenario. You may want to discard your phone, depending on the scenario, or have it on you. So when it comes to tools, I'm just going to read a list. Nothing crazy, but I was trying to cover several angles. Multi-tool, which I'm a Gerber guy. Survival knife, and there are a lot of uses for a survival knife. I don't want to get into it in this video because it's going to be long enough as it is, but It is a relevant tool, and again, it's not a weapon, it is a tool. Observation device, so binoculars, monocular, thermal, something like that. Flashlight and headlamp, by the way, touching on thermal, don't underestimate the value of a thermal. Thermal imaging is getting more affordable, and it really can't be replaced by anything else. Granted, once batteries are out, that's it, but depending on your situation, you may have batteries available. Back to it, flashlight and headlamp definitely have redundancies in light, especially having a handheld flashlight and a headlamp. I recommend Princeton Tech and Streamlight for those. Gloves, both tactical and work, right? So tactical, obvious reasons, but also it gives you more dexterity. Work, think hot and cold, sharp. So moving glass, something is hot, piece of metal, move it. Cold, in the winter or something like that. So be thinking those things. Think more debris and moving things out of the way. You can travel most of the way in your vehicle, but there's a tree down. Work gloves, so you don't, again, injure your hand, because even a small cut lead to infection. You die, your family dies. So, I know, again, some of this is dramatic, but really think this stuff out. Moving on, we've got writing implements for making notes, of course, and then a carabiner for hanging things. The carabiners are handy to have, and they weigh pretty much nothing and take up very little space. Of course, an axe, a saw, bolt cutters. Bolt cutters isn't what I'm doing because I'm going the lockpick route, so do consider that, but there are some other tricks you can use to destroy locks, such as 2 crescent wrenches, pop it off. There's different techniques that I've been looking into, and you should look into as well. Again, in most cases, you can own a lockpick, and in any of these cases, you can buy your own lock and practice picking it. You can buy your own lock and break it with a couple crescent wrenches. Learn those skills, and yeah, you may not need them, but for one, I find lockpicking interesting. It's fun. The other thing is, it's one of those skills where put a little time in, maybe get bored with it, but at least you've done it, right? Go back to what I said earlier. Moving on from there, snare wire. It's obviously for catching animals, because you want to conserve your ammo. And speaking of ammo, weapons. You may feel the need to protect your family. I'm not going to get into the wide array of weapons that you may want or should have, or gear, etc., but things to consider. Because again, people are going to want all this stuff that I'm telling you to consider. So next is shelter. Generic tarp, mosquito net as I mentioned, or a camouflage tarp, right? So I kind of have 2 different ponchos. One's camo, small, takes up no weight, so having it extra isn't a big deal. And then I have an orange one. One is for being found, one is for not. Things to consider. As far as shelter, that's really it. Ideally, you can move into a place or find a place that has shelter. You don't need to create your own. But if you did need to or want to, you want something available, then again, also watch YouTube. There's a lot of incredible ways to make a shelter using none of these things. The only other thing I'll add about shelter is I probably wouldn't have any of those items if it was just me. Maybe a poncho, because it's so small, but torrential downpour, I can probably find somewhere I can take cover myself. But again, with family, if I need to set up something and put a big tarp to shelter 4 of us from the rain, or 2 or 3 of us, and I'm out, standing outside of it under a tree, again, things to think about. Sustainment, so how you're going to store your water, your batteries, how you're going to retain things, so tape, glue, 550 cord, tubular nylon, great for all kinds of things, towing and dragging somebody that's injured, not dragging, but I think you know what I mean. Bungee cords for maybe keeping a tarp up over your family. Rags, so microfiber, good for cleaning out wounds to a degree, good for other kind of lenses and things if you're carrying a gun with a scope, or for some reason your binoculars or something. Microfiber rags are good to have. Pushing on from there, general organization, so for instance, I use these packs to organize groups of things together. It makes it a lot easier to pack and unpack my pack. So instead of a bunch of little items all around, it's like, oh, okay, this is my hygiene bag, and this is my fire starter bag. So everything being together makes it very nice to move things around. Of course, wet weather preparedness, methods of insulation. Those things are things that, I have a wet weather top, but just for one person, and then insulation. Food, especially lickies and chewies. So food is an interesting thing. You can buy all kinds of like SOS gear and You can buy MREs and things like that. I haven't completely nailed down my food part yet, so luckily this video won't take longer because of that, but just know that most of my plans right now, there is food at the place, and I can take enough food with me to sustain movement and myself and my family for a few days. Will we be hungry? Yes, but we will survive. Water being the most important thing, that's well covered. And then weapon sustainment, weapon cleaning kit, etc., and ammo. Now, other things to consider, what can you trade? So, watch, gun, ammo, lights, medical, all stuff that somebody might want that you might have or have extra. You can trade them to get something you need. When collapse society happens, there's no more money. Money is what you have. So consider those things. So caveats and variables, training. Get what you need or think you need to get, and then train with it. Gain skill, get skills that that don't just rely on an item. I mean, you need skills in general, but be able to execute certain tasks and be able to teach someone else. If your family's unwilling to learn with you and you learn by yourself, have enough knowledge that you can guide them on it as well. Find some quick reference books, things like that, plants, other things to think about knowledge. And my plan is I've got a few books. I'm going to try to make notes and condense all that information into one book for myself. Maybe I'll sell it as well. I don't know. It's going to be a while before I'm done with that. But, understanding vegetation and animals and your other things. It's kind of amazing how few people go outside these days. So they're not really aware of actual danger that can impact them when they can't just hang out in their house all day. So a little bit more about training. Do understand that training is going to help increase your limits, but it's also going to show you where your limits are. And maybe you can train past them, maybe you can't, and you need to make a choice or purchase something or learn a different skill that can supplement your shortcomings. Or, maybe if you can get your family in on this, maybe someone else is going to have a skill that you can't quite master, but someone else is really good at it, right? So having those skills. Another thing is, once you have all this packed together, wear it. Go on hikes with it. See if it rubs your shoulders or how. The bag I have, it's got a thinner belt on it. I don't really care for that, especially compared to other Mystery Ranch bags I have. So I might try to figure out a way to swap that out or just deal with it. So again, that matters. Also with all this, my kids are never going to be able to carry this bag, but I need to make it, even if I'm able to walk with it easily, due to recent military experience and being able to ruck and all that. My wife may not be able to. She's in decent shape, but not necessarily hike 5 miles with 35 pounds on her back shape. That's a different kind of shape. So consider that maybe something happens to you and you hurt your ankle and you can't carry this bag anymore. Now someone else has to carry it. Or you could stay where you are, but again, time on target, you want to get to where you need to be. So, more to consider. So fitness. As I said, exercise, think about these motions. I love bench press, things like that. Movement like that could come in handy, but also consider some of your more individual arm movements, or something like burpees, being able to get up, pull yourself up on something, pull-ups are a big one. Also deadlift, when you're wearing that pack, let's say you sit down with it or you fall down with it, now you have to stand up. Deadlifts are going to come in on that because it's you lifting that weight up. Squats, you're wearing the pack, you need to squat down, pick something up, stand back up. You can do those things, and fairly easily, if you're exercising. So as I said, wear the pack, do things like chop wood. That uses muscles that you're not necessarily using at the gym, and it builds calluses that you wouldn't build otherwise necessarily. So try to be active and do these things. I'm not saying you have to go out every day, but I try to collect some wood and then chop it. And sometimes I do it the hard way because I want to build either the muscle memory or the calluses or the experience or whatever doing that. And then I might do it a different way another time. Find good ways to hold down a piece of wood for you to chop it, or figure out good ways to support it for you to saw it very fast. Things like that. Be open to altering your bag, right? Especially after all this training you're doing with it. be open to the idea that, you know what, I just can't do that much weight. I don't have time to train for that much weight. I'm going to have to get rid of things from the bag. Or consider 2 bags. Split the 35 pounds between you and your spouse, whoever they may be, and practice things that way. Or, okay, it seems like now this is unrealistic. We need to change what our plan would be. Alright, right before I close, I do want to say this. When you see report of like military people moving to this location in the US, or you see them driving by on the highway or on a train, they're not necessarily going anywhere. Chances are it's a active, reserve, or National Guard unit, and they're doing something extremely boring that they don't want to do. Something to do with training, and they're probably moving their vehicles so they can go train with them. So don't freak out because you see military vehicles. It's normal. You may see them, you may not. Don't worry about it. You'll know when things are actually happening, especially the way the internet and things work these days. And if the internet gets blacked out, that's a pretty big sign that something's going on. And as far as natural disasters, for things like hurricanes, you may have a heads up, and you may be doing your thinking, your planning then. But again, pay attention to what's going on. Just don't overestimate military stuff. People ask me all the time about that. But anyway, next and finally, the close. I really just kind of wanted to make a video about getting people thinking about what they may need to think about. Gave some examples of some thinking I've been doing. I've spent probably close to the last year researching, acquiring, preparing things so that I would be some form of ready. I'm not going to be ready for everything. All this helps me be ready for certain things. That's why I started with the more realistic stuff and went out from there, right? I do have some ISO tablets, which is for a nuclear thing, and that's one of the ways that you can fight radiation, depending on, it's a whole thing of details I'm not going to go into. But again, those tablets, they weigh very little, they cost very little, and now they're in the pack, and it's something that I may need. So a lot of these choices are weighed upon, like, hey, is it big and heavy? Like, I haven't bought a bunch of mop gear for my whole family. It's not something I wouldn't do, but it's not a priority right now. And in the scale of how likely is it to happen, it's pretty much down at the bottom. And so, same with some of this stuff, as you've seen in the pictures, are stored in Faraday bags, which block electromagnetic pulse, and they also block tracking. They were inexpensive. I didn't need many of them, and they were also a good way to keep all those things together. And they weigh very little, and they don't really take up much more space than those items take up anyway. So when it came to how realistic it is that I would need them, wasn't as realistic, but it didn't really hurt to have them. So again, it all just comes to the balancing of the scales. And with that, this has been James Donaldson with The Contemporary Gentleman, and until next time, keep your composure.